Welcome everybody. I'm Cameron Diamond, New South Wales Property Leader for ARAP and host for our discussion today. In the spirit of reconciliation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Welcome to the third seminar in our Net Zero Carbon Local and Global Property Insight series, focusing on net zero carbon operations. To begin with, I would like to briefly reflect on the previous webinars and how far we have come. Please note our event page has recordings of the previous webinars and this one, and a link will be available in the chat. So the first webinar set the scene with net zero carbon strategy, where we heard valuable insights locally from Margot Black of Investor and insights from the US from Sarah Neff of Lendlease Americas. Quoting Sarah Neff, "It is a crazy time to be in sustainability in America. There is incredible pressure now from our ratings agencies and our investors to report on ESG and meet sustainability targets." Margot Black highlighted investors' recent $140 million green bond tied to an emissions intensity threshold, a clear demonstration of investors putting their money where their mouth is in Australia. In the second webinar, we explored net zero carbon delivery and gained insights locally from Greg Johnson of Stockland and from Milan, Stefano Corbella from Coima, providing European context and insights. We learned from Greg Johnson that Scope 3 emissions represent 92% of Stockland's carbon footprint. And this is the next frontier after many successful initiatives focusing on energy efficiency and on-site renewable generation across their assets. Stefano Corbella presented some great insights into how the EU regulations are driving net zero outcomes across scopes 1, 2 and 3 emissions. The EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation has created a structural shift in buildings towards measuring, reporting and improving building performance. And EU taxonomy means buildings must decarbonise lest they become a stranded asset and tax penalties apply. Net zero and decarbonisation in real estate is such a red hot topic, with increasing demand from consumers and investors. Listening back to the previous two webinars, it really feels like even over the last few weeks, the mood for change has enhanced, with the desire to realise net zero and decarbonisation ambitions. This Insight series has cut across COP26, with the second webinar essentially being the day after the Australian government committed to net zero by 2050. And now this webinar being not long after the conclusion of the meeting. During the latter stages of COP26, ARAP made a public announcement to commit to whole life cycle carbon assessments for all our building projects globally, new and retrofit. This means that for the first time, we will have the embedded carbon data we need to design better buildings and the data to share with our clients and with our industry partners about the precise actions needed to decarbonise buildings. Sharing our respective journeys during this exciting time of change is key to collectively making a difference in arresting global emissions in the attempt to keep the Earth under 1.5 degrees Celsius, the safe limit for temperature rise as outlined in the Paris Agreement. Today, I'm delighted to bring together an Australian headquartered real estate firm and an Asian-centred global property firm to delve into the operation of their property portfolios and to share insights into the implementation of their net zero and decarbonisation ambitions. I'm delighted to introduce our guest speakers, Darren Teo, Head of Sustainability Real Estate at AMP Capital, and Dr. Raymond Yao, General Manager, Technical Services and Sustainable Development at Swire Properties Limited, Hong Kong. Welcome to you both from your respective locations. Darren is responsible for driving and managing AMP Capital Real Estate's ESG strategies and capability. Darren has extensive experience in real estate and is known for a subject matter expert in ESG sustainability, especially in net zero strategy development and execution, which saw the successful delivery of a net zero carbon portfolio 9 years ahead of the target date. He is involved in many industry and government working groups, including as current Deputy Chair of Property Council of Australia's New South Wales Sustainability Committee, previously chairing the Green Building Council of Australia's Green Star Expert Reference Panel, and was a steering committee member for the 3rd edition of the PCA Office Building Quality Guide. Raymond is currently Director of Hong Kong Green Building Council, Chair of Expert Group on Super Low Energy Target Setting, and Certification and Technical Committee Chair on Advancing Net Zero Ideas Competition. Raymond also serves as a member of the Advisory Council on the Environment, Board of Directors of Building Environment Council, is a founding member of the IWBI Governance Council, GRESB Standard Review, and China Green Building Council. At Swire Properties since 2016, he leads important initiatives including the formulation of SD 2030 strategies, digital innovation of energy management platforms, climate risk assessment, 1.5 degree aligned science-based targets setting, and implementation strategies of carbon emission and energy reduction, paving way to net zero by 2050 and ESD green finance framework. Welcome to you both. So for today's format, the speakers will be providing around a 10-minute overview, presenting an overview presentation introducing their respective firms and sharing their journeys in relation to net zero carbon operations. I will break in between presentations with a question or two, and then we'll have a facilitated Q&A session. So please feel free to post questions in the chat throughout, and we will come together at the end for an all-in discussion. Without further ado, I will now invite Darren to please join us and share his insights. Welcome, Darren.
Thank you, Cameron, for the introduction, and thank you, Aru, for organizing this session today. Good morning, good afternoon, and probably good evening to everyone on the call, depending on where you're dialing in from. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodian of the land on which we meet today, pay my respect to the elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So today I'm going to discuss some of our thinking and actions on creating a net zero carbon operations across the AMP Capital portfolio. Next slide, please. So I believe everyone on the call today is now aware of the importance of achieving net zero carbon, which has been a very hot topic over the last couple of months, as mentioned by Cameron. So clearly, there's the science around climate change, which was well articulated in the recent IPCC report. So I'm not going into detail on that. But that aside, real estate companies like ours are also being pressured by other key stakeholders that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So you got many institutional investors, the capital market, they are setting targets for themselves, and they are actually looking at their investment managers, so basically ourselves or any of their investment companies, to be able to achieve those targets. But not only those institutional investors, but we have also seen an increase in queries from our existing customers, so basically our tenants in our buildings, and also in leasing. Responding to RFI on leasing for across our portfolio, whether it's office or retail, asking about whether we as a landlord had made any commitments on net zero, or whether, as a minimum, whether we are looking at procuring renewable electricity. So that's definitely a change that we're seeing over the last probably 6 months, and it has definitely increased. And we will see that more and more in the next following years. Next slide, please. So who's AMP Capital Real Estate? So AMP Capital, we are basically an investment organization. AMP Capital Real Estate, we are an investment manager for direct real estate fund, and we manage about 23 billion Australian dollars in real estate assets on behalf of our global investors. We have about 42 office and logistics assets, so commercial buildings, your warehouses, and so on and so forth, and about 26 retail assets, basically your shopping centers, whether it's, there are big ones like Pacific Fair, Macquarie Centre, and there are regional ones like Casula Mall and Marrickville Metro. So back in 2019, we launched our 2030 sustainability strategy that sets out our commitment as a company to achieve or to shape a better future. And that is public. And since then, we've been, producing annual sustainability reports every year to showcase, the work and the progress that we have achieved over the last 12 months. So all this information is all publicly available, and you can definitely download it from our website. Next slide, please. So this is our 2030 sustainability strategy framework in a slide. And it's basically built around 5 key objectives, as you can see on the left. I'm probably not going to read through all of them. And with the sustainability strategy, we developed our strategy around the 3 pillars: the E, which is environmental; the S, which is social; and G, which is governance. And under those 3 pillars, there are 12 different focus areas, 4 of each of those pillars, which informs our key deliverable over the next 10 years to 2030. Next slide, please. Now, out of the 12 focus areas, these are the 6 focus areas that we are working hard on at the moment. And, there's a lot of deliverables that we need to achieve over the next, 5 years, so to speak. And obviously, net zero is being one of the most important one, and probably the more complicated one as well, in comparison to the other 5. And especially because most of our existing assets were built before the availability of any green building rating tools. So most of our asset was built before 2000. So there were no guidance back then to guide those development. So yeah, for us, inheriting those design now, that's where it's going to be a challenge for us to work through that to get to where we want to get to. Next slide, please. So I won't be spending too much time on this slide. It's basically just showing, we've thought through our plan, we've thought through our strategy, and this is a timeline that we were showing what initiatives that we are aiming to achieve over the next 10 years. Note that, this timeline here is being updated annually as we look at the trends, as we develop, as we get more assets and things like that. So, but at least it's a guiding document for us as a team to work towards our end goal. Next slide, please. Now, this slide shows the way we manage our sustainability practices in the portfolio. So basically, we do it through a lot of engagement. And trust me, when I say a lot, it's a lot. This slide shows the 3 key documents that's being used in those engagements. So on the left is the overarching 2030 sustainability strategy for the business, which I explained earlier. Now, using that as a reference, we will then develop a fund-specific strategy that is being reviewed annually with our fund management team and investment management team. And this document will basically capture agreed initiatives and targets, not only from the sustainability team, but from the fund management team, as well as investors within those funds. So we have clients within those funds that might have certain agenda or certain targets that they would like to achieve, and we basically get those information through this engagement process. Now, once we agree the strategy with our fund management team, we will then develop what we call an asset ESG plan with our asset management team. So each asset that we manage has a plan as such. And this is also updated annually, and we track it quarterly. And through the process, the team will then work with our asset management team, so property managers, operation managers, service providers, and whatnot, to support in the delivery of those targets and deliverables. So you can see that engagement is really important in driving a net zero operation portfolio. Next slide, please. So we have a net zero carbon strategy to be achieved in 2030, and really it's only the 5 principles, which is pretty straightforward. So our net zero carbon strategy is mainly focusing on scope 1 and 2 for now, and we want to do it. The reason why is we want to do it well, and we want to do it right. So, and like I said, it's pretty straightforward. Energy efficiency is definitely the top of the list, because any energy that you do not use, not only it saves you money, but it reduces your carbon footprint as well. Next, after we sort of looked at the energy efficiency side of things, we will start to look at on-site solar where it's feasible, and then followed by procuring electricity contract that are supplied from 100% renewable source, or commonly known as a PPA. Now, up to here, your scope 2 emissions will probably be well looked after. Then for scope 1, which is typically your gas, your diesel, your refrigerant, our strategy is to procure domestic nature-based carbon credits to offset those emissions. So for in Australia, we basically procure ACCUs, or the Australian Carbon Credit Units. And lastly, we look at strategies to reduce our scope 1 emission through electrification and conversion to low GWP refrigerants. Now, some might ask, why is this the last action? Well, the answer is pretty simple. We have some existing assets at the moment that still have probably 10 to 15-year life. So we are not going to replace them when they are working perfectly fine. So in the interim, we will try to reduce the usage and procure offsets until we could replace them entirely down the track. Next slide, please. Now, with the above strategy, I'm quite happy to say that about 43% of AMP Capital Real Estate's asset under management will achieve net zero status from the 1st of Jan 2022. So actually, one of our portfolio, our wholesale office fund, will achieve it this year, and the other one will start from 2022. Now, this achievement is definitely well ahead of our original target of 2030. Now, with these two portfolios, I can say that for the office fund, as I mentioned, energy efficiency comes first. The portfolio has an average neighbors rating of 5.2 stars out of 6. And the average age of the asset in that portfolio is about 20 years. So we have done our best to improve the efficiency of those buildings as much as you can. And we've followed by sourcing renewable electricity contracts now. And currently we are working on the remaining of the portfolio, which is the remaining 64% or so, with the aim to start from 2023. So that's 7 years ahead of our target. Fingers crossed. And next slide, please. Now, electrification is probably one of the most challenging bit in getting to net zero carbon, especially for existing buildings. Here, you are looking at removing gas from heating and moving it to electricity, typically with, say, a heat pump application. And for diesel generators, you could be looking at, say, battery storage, or maybe biodiesel as well to replace your diesel. Please note that I've definitely excluded the diesel consumption associated with any life-saving equipment, say for instance, your fire hydrant pumps and those sort of equipment, because I think more consultation is required for those to go 100% electric. So there's a lot of consideration in electrifying your building, as listed in those bullet points: spatial requirement, existing infrastructure, technology, control system, cooking appliances came up as well as part of our review. But my advice is to start early, regardless of all these challenges. Just to give you an example, we've actually started to review the only Trigen system that we have in the portfolio for an asset in Melbourne. And there's still about 10, 15 years life in those equipment there. So basically the review will look at what are we going to do when this comes to the end of life, or should we replace it now, and things like that. So we're starting very early just to hopefully overcome some of those challenges that's listed there in the future. Next slide, please. Now, refrigerant is another scope 1 emission item that needs to be addressed. And I think sometimes this is one of those that's being overlooked. But it can be done very easily. It doesn't have the constraint that we have in electrifying our building. Now, the transition is not on the transition from HFC to HFO is not only better for the environment, but it could actually future-proof your asset as well. Currently there's a refrigerant phase down in Australia and many other countries that has started about 2-3 years ago as per the Kigali Amendment. And according to IRA, if the industry continues with business as usual approach, specifying chiller running on HFCs like R134A and so on and so forth, there could be a risk of high prices for these refrigerants in the future due to the demand and supply. So if you replace it with HFO, you probably could avoid having a headache down the track. Now, because of this, we have since amended our own requirement to only specify HFO refrigerant for all chiller replacement or equipment that has refrigerant charge of 100 kilograms or more in the portfolio. And you can see the photo here. It shows one of the newest chillers that we will have in our portfolio. It's for Key Quarter Towers, a 90,000 square meter building that will open in March 2022. And it's designed by Arab, so it's a good outcome. Next slide, please. So that's pretty much from myself. And just to wrap this up, look, I just want to stress that net zero carbon is a journey. It's not a sprint. So you have to, but it has to start today, right? You have to start planning. You have to start reviewing your portfolio from today. Importance of ESG is likely to increase. It's not going away. It's probably going to be one of those key KPIs moving forward as well by a lot of businesses. Real estate has the best chance of showing leadership in achieving net zero carbon. It's proven. There's a lot of literatures out there that demonstrated that. Now, aiming for net zero requires long-term and innovative thinking on how project needs to be done. So like I said, you have to start today, start reviewing it, look at your system as a whole. Don't look at each equipment in isolation. And the last thing is you need to have a clear roadmap with realistic targets. And that is very important. If you don't have a roadmap with realistic target, you are not getting anywhere. And that's what I've learned over the last couple of years as well in my journey. So I think that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Darren. Really interesting. I like your points about it being a journey and not a sprint. Perhaps I could suggest maybe a slow jog. But it's a very what I noticed in that presentation was it's a very rational approach, and you can't, Rome wasn't built in a day, and I can really appreciate that it is that journey. I had one. We've probably only got time for one quick question. I wanted to just ask about the process where you've set out your framework, you've got your strategies, and then your implementation is via your sort of asset ESG plans. I was wondering if you could provide any insights into how you prioritise your capital expenditure decisions on these assets. You spoke about a lot of engagement, but is it purely cost benefit return of investment, or do you consider the carbon return of investment as well?
That's a bit of both, I have to say. So most of our asset, they have what we call a neighbors roadmap. We call a net zero carbon roadmap. So what that is, it's no different than an energy audit. That's just probably a little bit more detailed than your typical energy audit. So in there, we would require information such as, okay, if this is the investment that we need on that specific project, what is the return, not only on return on investment, but what is the carbon reduction overall? So that's how we kind of look at allocating capital. If I have 100 grand today, for example, and I look at that report and it says, okay, if you replace LED, it'll cost you 100 grand. The ROI is short and the carbon offset is great, then obviously that will go on top of the list. But equally, if you got 100 grand, even if the ROI is slightly longer, but that specific project will still give you the best sort of carbon reduction opportunity, that will probably go on top of the list as well. So that's kind of how we structure it. And because we take everyone on the journey, so everyone is aware that, okay, this is how it's being played out. And the asset ESG plan is great because that's the document that we've agreed with the asset. And because only the general managers of the asset knows what they are planning for their own buildings. Like I don't know that information. So they would be able to then inform us as to, okay, Darren, the next 5 years, this is what I want to do for my building. So we will work with them on that and use that to inform the fund managers to say, look, here is our asset ESG plan. It has been agreed between us and the sustainability team. What do you think? So there's quite a bit of engagement. So like I said, from top down and then from down up again. So I think it's been a pretty good process. No doubt there's always, that discussion around payback and things like that. But the team has done pretty well now that they try to balance out between, okay, you got ROI, but also what's the carbon reduction potential.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Darren. We'll move on now and hear from Raymond. Hi, Raymond.
Hi everybody. And so thank you for having me. And indeed, this week is pretty exciting in this part of the world, in Hong Kong, because there's an international conference on advancing net zero is being organized. And today is the third day of the fourth day event. And tomorrow there will be an announcement of international advancing net zero ideas competition winners. So people, particularly for those architectural firms or engineering consultancy firms, put together submissions. Tomorrow will be a very exciting moment. And today's, thank you for inviting me to this session, right? The topic of my short presentation is to share with the audiences the advancing net zero, or indeed the sustainable development journey at Swire Properties. Next, please. I believe I ought to give you some backgrounds of Swire Properties. It's established in the year 1972, and we are developers, owners, and operators of office, retail, and hotel and residential properties, with particular focus on mixed-use developments in Hong Kong, Chinese mainland, as well as in Miami cities in the States, and with a recent presence in Singapore and Indonesia. As of middle of this year, our total investment portfolios, plus the trading portfolios, amounts to over 28 million square feet of area. And just to share with you some of our sustainability indexing benchmarking performances, as can be seen here, we have been, I think, chosen to be the top company since 2018 in the local stock exchange Hang Seng Corporate Sustainability Index. And also, since 2017, we have been included in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index World Index, and being the only constituent company from Hong Kong region. And also, we since 2017, we are the global sector leader in the mixed-use development under the GRESB evaluation. And particularly for those audience interested in the more technical side, and some of our recent submissions to the ASHRAE gave us the award of the Global Technology Award, achieving the first place winner in the retro commissioning projects. Next, please. I'd like to start saying the company has been doing a lot of work on decarbonization, more than 2 decades. But in the year 2016, we decided to rekindle the whole movement by setting out a new, what we call the SD 2030 strategies, a new strategies in an attempt to embracing every colleague within the corporate. I have to say, in the past, it was primarily the duty of the technical team addressing the issue of energy saving. But since 2016, with the new strategy in place, every colleague within the company, be the frontline marketing people, leasing people, as well as technical people and senior executive, are all involving in this sustainability journey. And that's the strategy based on 5 pillars, encompassing our businesses: places, exciting, creating exciting places, and people joining together to work on businesses, including sustainability, and also our partners along our whole value chain to deliver exemplary environmental performances as well as economic performances. And out of the environmental performances, one of the key drivers is to align with the science-based target in an attempt to achieve the Paris Agreement vision. In this case, it's this 1.5 aligned science-based target. So in 2019, 2 years ago, we have our 2-degree aligned SBT approved by SBTi. And this year in September, just a few months ago, we got our 1.5-degree aligned SBT approved by the SBTi. And these are the numbers. So in other words, we now have to work on our absolute GHG emission by the year, in 5 years' time, 25% compared to the 2019 baseline year. And another near-term target, 2030, we need to reduce it by 46% in absolute term versus the 2019. But we didn't just stop on addressing the scope 1 and 2 emissions, as well as on scope 3. For real estate developers such as Smart Properties, and similarly for other peers developers, our downstream lease asset, which in other words, our tenant carbon emission, also constitute a great deal in our whole building life cycle consideration. And we set targets to achieve 28%, and also on our new developments, which classify under the capital goods, 25% as well. So this is a tall order and ambitious commitment, especially this is supposed to be in line with the 1.5 degree. And the chart on the right shows a typical buildings, office buildings in our stock. Over 60% are to do with the embodied carbon emission, which I highlighted earlier, the tenant operation energy, as well as the new development projects in terms of the upfront carbon. And the rest will alluding to the 1 and 2, which have indeed some degree or strong degree of control by the landlord. And so when we wrap up all this together, seemingly giving us tremendous responsibility in working out how to really decarbonize our stock. Next, please. So these are some of the details. So and for existing buildings, over the years, we have been doing a lot of decarbonization effort. If you look at the chart on the right, illustrating our effort over the past decade, since 2008, when we started to have detailed record about energy performances and so on. This chart shows the reduction in terms of the energy use intensity over the years. So up until last year. So this is indeed quite an achievement, I have to say. But with our recent commitment on the SBT, we need to continue to work on it more aggressively over our all stocks in Chinese mainland, which occupy roughly about 40% of our current gross floor area, as well as our stocks in Hong Kong and in a new developments area elsewhere. So the bottom chart shows with our new commitment, one of the methods we have to manage our portfolio to achieve the near-term SBT target, which is to control the reduction or deliver strategy reducing the energy use intensity. This is one of the most effective way in managing our stock and with numbers, with data, and we monitor basically on a half-year basis, and also with our recent installation of one of the system I also highlighted in this slide, which is called a cloud-based smart energy management platform for our global portfolio. It actually measures data on every 15 minutes and collectively on daily, monthly, and compare portfolios not only on its own right, and to see whether the systems is operating in the right manner, and then intervene either semi-automated or automated measures to rectify it, to improve the operation, in order to help us to deliver really good performances that could be measured up by the energy use intensity and so on. The list here also addressed some of the major activities that help us in achieving this order of magnitude of saving over the years. We have retro commissioning on our existing stock. We expand it to do it on a monitoring basis and help us indeed to achieve a great deal. And also we explore new simple technologies such as the DC motor fan, replacing all our existing, for example, the centrifugal fan in our air handling units. And we done pilot to test it out about 5 years ago, done our first pilot and proved to achieve at least about 40% saving compared to existing operations and so on. Since then, we implement across all our existing stocks, and that become a standard specification in our new buildings development as well. And we specify new buildings to achieve a tall order of magnitudes in terms of performances and so on. So as can be seen, over the last 12 years, we achieved over 100 million kilowatt hour saving a year. And this is indeed, I could call it a big achievement. And with the cloud-based energy management platform in place, we are beginning to incorporate artificial intelligence based on expert system, as well as new innovation machine learnings in controlling our chiller plants in achieving the energy optimization. Next, please. So to now move to renewable energy, as Darren has highlighted earlier, that's the crucial part in achieving, helping us along this advancing net zero journey. So we do have some on-site renewable energy generation, despite our scarcity of this type of resources locally in Hong Kong, in land scarcities and accessibility to these renewable sources and so on. Although in our Chinese mainland portfolio, the resources is greater, but it still have to rely on a lot of this major grid to enable us to achieve this, despite our efforts to install renewable energy locally on site. So, but luckily, due to recent development in China's mainland, in at least about 2 of our existing portfolios there, for instance, in Chengdu, towards the west part of China's mainland, as well as in Guangzhou, we were able to gain access to 100% of renewable energy through purchasing third-party power producers. So enabling 2 of our sites achieving 100% renewable energy. But certainly we do extensive due diligence in ascertaining about the sources, and because these are also supported by the central government for certain localities in China, providing this reasonable supply of renewable energy. We are indeed one of the earliest adopters, as well as developers, able to achieve or managing to purchase those 100% renewable energy. Next, please. So I've shared with you about how we address the Scope 1 and 2 operational energy, operational carbon reduction journey. Now, I want to talk a bit about the embodied carbon, which are essential, particularly in addressing our new developments in the pipeline, as well as to see how the existing stocks, for example, how we would put it into the yardstick in ascertaining, keeping existing structures in providing future asset in our stocks. So we've done some in-depth analysis with the Hong Kong universities, in this case it's Hong Kong UST, ascertaining about the carbon footprint of one of our newly developed project, which is quite a tall buildings, about 40 stories, over 1 million square foot GFA, opened just less than, about slightly more than a year ago in our prime site in Taikoo Place in Hong Kong. So we've done the metrics and to arrive the upfront carbon, which is the A1 to A5, I call the British standard cradle to site embodied carbon, which is about 575 kilogram of carbon dioxide emission per construction floor area in that case, and primarily attributing due to the rebar, the outriggers structural form of the building, as well as the concrete, reinforced concrete. Despite the fact that we have already specified low carbon cement for these buildings, and almost high percentage of the recycled steels in the steels for this structure. So we are continuing to work on this and work out a low carbon spec for all our subsequent new developments in Hong Kong as well as in Chinese mainland. We work with universities, in Tsinghua universities in our China case, on ascertaining about the specs and sourcing of those kinds of GVGS or that type of cement substitute and constituents in our reinforced concrete. So but this is an area that still needs a lot of research and education to ascertain how we could do more in reducing the embodied carbon. Next, please. So we talk about a lot of areas about the main structures, how we can affect the quality of the buildings we construct and operate. Now move to another area pretty crucial to a developer. In one of the earlier slides, I showed almost 44% or 45% of the embodied carbon emission or carbon emission of a typical office building coming from the tenant, the energy usages in this case, in the office case. So we roll out a whole series of tenant engagement program in an attempt to work with our office tenants as well as our retail tenants in our retail portfolio to help them to reduce their energy consumption, to help to reduce the Scope 2 carbon emission, and therefore our Scope 3 carbon emission reduction. So we have rolled out a scheme fairly similar to green lease or green patches, but not on a sort of legally binding situation as yet. We call it a green performance pledge. So under which we want our tenant to commit together with us to cooperate and communicate and share data. We also help the tenants to, for example, do free energy audit to ascertain about the energy usage status, and then as well as on water and resources recycling and so on. So and also we provide a strong guidance on sustainable material fit out and during the major renovation. And so we now test it out on some of our major tenants. And it's very good news that many of them are pleased to join, and despite that, no particular financial incentive to begin with, but just to share the sort of commitment, the output in an attempt to grow together on this particular front. So we also have for office tenants, we also install some pilots, what we call the tenant power metering system, in an attempt to measure their energy performance and giving us, both the tenant and ourselves, opportunity to explore how to further the reduction of the tenant's energy consumption, with a hope to reduce it extensively in the longer run. So this is a new attempt and proved to be very positive. We have similar kinds of engagement with our retail tenant, but time is limited, so I'm not going to dwell on too much of this. But overall, Swire Properties take our long-term decarbonization journey pretty seriously. Other than just committed to the Paris Agreement 1.5 degree aligned pathway, we work extensively to engage and educate our tenants, which we do believe it is a worthwhile journey. Together, we can help to reduce substantially the energy usages and thereby the carbon emission of our real estate stock. So I just got to stop here. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Raymond. Very impressive credentials that Swire Properties have. Your operations are achieving some of the top rankings across various rating systems, such as the top performer under the Hang Seng Corporate Sustainability Index, I just heard that you're an early adopter of 100% renewables in China. I heard also you mentioned absolute net zero, which is a term that also we heard on a previous webinar from the Americas. And of course, that's the net zero that takes into account your scope 3 and your embodied carbon. And also talking about tenant engagement. So well done. I'll open it up, just considering time. I'll actually bring Darren into the fold as well, and we'll go straight into the Q&A. I'll start perhaps just with a question for you, Raymond, in terms of the fact that your company operates across Hong Kong, China, Chinese mainland, and Miami, eclectic mix. I'm curious as to what the drivers are in the differences in drivers in these different regions. Are you reaching for the stars at the moment because of government regulation and carbon price, or is it the industry demand and the capital that's asking for it in these different regions?
Oh, it's everything basically. In Hong Kong, for instance, there's not such a really strong policy, but in China, there's growing to have a stronger policy in stipulating the carbon emission. But to being a listed company, there's whole loads of incentive to examine ourselves really well, whether we are working in the right pathway, to be a very sustainable basically developers. So that's why we are very interested to stay ahead of the curve, to learn from others how we can even perform better in this way. Being a listed company with a lot of global investors interested in the performance in this front of our company. So these are one of the key drivers. But aside from that, there's a lot of very important elements, is because saving energy, saving the bottom line, it's 10% is equivalent to, because we are at least about paying or consuming at present 10 million kilowatt hour per year of our stocks. It makes all senses to save money to help the business going forward. But in terms of the government regulation, we yet to see this type of requirement in Hong Kong, despite the fact that they are encouraging better operation of the HVAC system. But certainly, I think we are doing that already. So we don't need any particular regulation or policy to encourage us doing so. But however, in China, particularly with the new carbon neutrality pledge by 2060, and with the new carbon peaking commitment by 2030. So basically, for us, as a major developers in Chinese mainland, we certainly need to do our job. Therefore, we are aggressively addressing this. We're not only experiment existing technologies enabling doing that, but we are certainly doing a lot of innovation. For example, one of the strategies we're now doing our pilot in China is to experiment the adoption of direct current microgrid in our buildings. And just, I think less than 2 weeks ago, in one of the documents issued by the State Council of PRC, addressing on carbon emission peaking by 2030, right? That document actually illustrates what the real estate sector, as well as other sectors, need to do. So they call it an action plan. And they actually listed this DC energy storage and PV, integrated it together to make it a flexible power usages and building design is one of the future for the real estate sector. So that incidentally align with our pilot project that we set out at least about a year ago, which is currently close to under design by consultant. So I think there's a lot of incentive, not necessarily financial, but in China, encouraging or requiring some degree of the local developers, particularly for developers like Swire Properties, to experiment in order to achieve the carbon neutrality as quickly as possible. But in the States, I suspect it is a lot to do with the investor perspective rather than a local requirement there. But certainly in the States, there's also a lot of encouragement from, for example, of the Miami asset that we are, because Miami City in itself is quite vulnerable from climate risk, and developers and as well as the local government are working closely together in addressing making stocks or buildings more resilient locally there, as probably opposed to different cities in the States. So we have a different incentive, different consideration when implementing our advancing net zero strategy.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? One's sort of about risk and on climate change, and the other's encouraging that innovation in technology, which you mentioned the conference tomorrow. There's going to be a net zero ideas competition winner announced, so I'll be really keen to hear who that is and what that technologies are. I'm just having a look at some of the questions that's up in the chats, and perhaps Darren, I'll come to you first. I think there's a couple there that are addressing the Scope 3 emissions, perhaps in relation to construction of new buildings. So Darren, you know, is there do you set this is from Dylan Smith, do you set a limit or a target for embodied carbon content in your new buildings design briefs?
Very loose at the moment, so we're working on a realistic approach. So we've done a demonstration project at Key Quarter Towers. So, you know, basically knock down 1/3 of the building, and then extending it out. So a 50,000 square meter building became 90,000 square meter building. So that's a really good use case. So we're using that as the experience now and trying to develop what we think would be the next step for us moving forward. But we're not discounting it. It's definitely something that we're working on at the moment. But I can't say too much because I haven't really publicly made any announcement yet until I have a proper document to show. But like I said, we have a showcase that is actually, you know, is being done. It's currently being built, and it will be open in March 2022. That demonstrated, you know, one of our commitment to explore this as an opportunity, a massive building reuse.
Yeah, no doubt, it's an emerging thing addressing Scope 3 and the embodied carbon within your buildings and your new buildings. Raymond, are you, when you're looking at new developments, are you right at the beginning setting some decarbonisation or embodied carbon limits in terms of your construction?
Not at this stage, because based on research we've done with the university, we find it is extremely difficult to put in numbers against it as a target. But for the time being, we certainly specify low carbon specification. But also the consultant and the contractors will have to work together to work out the corresponding implication in terms of basically the carbon metrics. So for our type of new buildings, for example, a reasonable tall high-rise, 40-story, a typical sort of buildings in this part of the world. So we have a collection of carbon numbers around 500 and 570 and so on, and 600 and 650. They're also in line with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development research to an extent. So at this moment, it's too early stage to put in numbers against it as a target. But instead, out of the whole procurement process, we are researching into it, requesting the consultant to give us advice with different selection of materials and so on and so forth, and also the contractor to source those relative low carbon the materials. And we also encouraging architects and engineers in the design team to consider adoption of other low carbon materials such as gulum timber for some type of the spaces that they're designing for us, whether those will be useful and so on. So that Yes, definitely, this is key in all aspects, but we don't put any numbers against it as yet.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much, Raymond and Darren. Look, I've got to leave myself a couple of minutes here just to talk about the next webinar. So I've got hundreds of questions, really. There's a few questions probably in the chat that I didn't get to. Apologies there. But it is a topic where there's a lot of knowledge sharing and insights that create a lot of dialogue. So I really appreciate your time. So I'll talk about our next webinar in our Insight series. It's the fourth and final. It's on Thursday, the 9th of December. We'll be joined by Niels Rage from Stanhope in London and our Kristen Simons from Arup, along with another international speaker to be confirmed shortly. For this fourth seminar, we'll be exploring net zero carbon development, and I hope you can all join us. Don't forget, actually, that webinars 1, 2, 3, and then to come 4 will all be recorded. So, and they'll be up on the web page for everybody to be able to listen to at their own leisure. Thank you very much again for our guests, Darren and Raymond, and to everybody on the call today for joining us. Have a good morning and good afternoon wherever you are, everyone. Thank you.